Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So today we have joining us once more is Abda, the co-founder of Intuitum. This is the company that brought us CISO Assistant. So thanks once more for joining us today, Abda. So this is actually part 3 in our CISO Assistant series. So in the last part, we covered asset management, business impact analysis, as well as internal audits, right? So in this video, we'll be focusing on external compliance audits as well as risk management. So again, really happy to have Abda here, who'll be able to bring his first-hand expertise in explaining and breaking down these concepts in terms of how CISO Assistant can assist us with this. So without any further delays, I'll just like to hand over to you, Abda.
Thank you, Josh, again for having me. Like you mentioned, this is going to be a follow up on the previous sessions where we focused on how to make use of the compliance module for your internal audits, your internal compliance follow up. And this idea is to reuse the same concepts for external compliance, specifically on third parties management. Typically, this is something referred to as TPRM, third party risk management. And before we jump to the application, let's just take a step back and do some data modeling to get a full scope of what we're doing here. So, whenever we have to manage the risks of our third parties, our vendors, there are two approaches today in the industry. There are like scan oriented approach, and there's the questionnaire approach. Without going into too much details, both have pros and cons. The idea of the scans is essentially that you can maybe run some technical checks, and with those technical checks, you can maybe get some knowledge around what's going on the platform. You can maybe get some signals, or maybe on dark web, you can get some information to build kind of scoring of the vendor. And based on that information, you can assess the risk and your willingness to work with that vendor. The full scope of this can be detailed later on, but essentially, this is quite interesting because it's quick. It can scale pretty fast and give you the information very quickly. But that information is kind of combined information. You don't have all the details, and it can be tricked quite easily because in a lot of cases, those signals are mixed or have multiple noise with maybe some shared infrastructures or some only the reachable surface being scannable and so on and so on. So there are a lot of literature there that you can check. But in a nutshell, scans are quite fast and can scale quite efficiently, but they can easily be tricked and are not as comprehensive as people tend to think of them. Now, the second part, which is the questionnaire approach. On the questionnaire approach, the idea is that you will request your vendors to fill a questionnaire, as the name states it, and on which you're going to define either a framework out of the industry, maybe a framework from CISA, maybe something else, or you can create yours and request the vendors to answer if they have like proper patch management, if they have some certifications, if like the um, um, maybe the internal team has proper security training and awareness and so on and so on. So you can even define yours. Now, the advantage of this is that you can be as thorough as you want, and you can focus on specific areas that will be interesting for you. But then again, the cons here will be the fact that it could be time consuming and people need to take the time to answer everything and could even end up in repetitive situation where vendors in some cases even can decline to answer your questionnaire. So very quickly, this is the landscape of what's going on in third parties. And for the sake of consistency with the other modules, we went with the second one for CISO Assistant, where we kind of reused the compliance engine and just tweaked it to fit the need of the TPRM part. Does that
Question,
make sense?
Abda. Yeah. Yeah, it does actually. And that one of my questions is uh between the both of them, right? The scan oriented approach and the questionnaire. In my career, I have mostly used, or I have only used the questionnaire approach, right? But from your experience, which one is most popular, would you say?
The most popular so far that I've seen is the questionnaire because it's more affordable and you can fine tune it to
Right,
your need. And this, in some context, I've seen also a hybrid approach where we've actually sent questionnaires to like very specific vendors with specific criticality regarding their business because they
right.
don't want to stop at the first layer. And
Yeah,
for organizations with a lot of vendors, what I mean by a lot, like when you're exceeding like plus 100, you cannot afford just to send questionnaire all the time and go
right,
through them thoroughly because you need like almost a full team to manage that. So you can maybe split your vendors into criticalities categories and just have a hybrid setup between the two. The scans are quite interesting, but as far as I know, all of them require some infrastructure, and all solutions
right,
are paid because they need those infrastructures.
right.
And you end up in a situation where you kind of just trust in a third party to give you the
Yeah,
trustworthiness of a third party, which is quite interesting as a concept, but
yeah.
that's essentially it. It will
Okay,
depend on the maturity and the scale and your budget regarding that. Where the questionnaires, you can do a ping pong with Excel sheets. It's fine if you have like two or three vendors. But
right.
once you start getting higher than that, you definitely need to be equipped.
Okay, got it. Thanks for explaining. And I think the advantage with the questionnaire, as you mentioned, it's more customizable in what you could ask specific questions that's relevant to your organizations, where it may not be able to do that with these scans. It might be more generic or high level. Yeah. So,
Absolutely.
so for this video, the questionnaire approach, that's what CISO Assistant is focusing on.
Indeed. And
Okay.
what we're gonna pick out of this idea of questionnaire is that it's gonna be fundamentally an audit behind the curtains. This is what
Right.
the application will manage. It's just it will present it differently. So one thing before I jump to the app is regarding this questionnaire approach. The idea is that we're gonna need to track entities. So basically, entities that we need to track. Those will be your vendors. The fact that we call it entities is that you can even maybe manage the compliance of some internal entities that could be like internal providers. So that this way it's more generic and more usable. And within each entity, you will have fundamentally solutions that those entities are providing you. A solution could be a service, could be a product, could be something that is quite hybrid, where in cases you want to assess the full vendor as a whole. In other, you want maybe to assess like a specific SaaS that they're offering, or a solution that you're installing, or even the fact that they have contractors interacting with your IT, and so on and so on. So you could
Right.
have different angles there for each one of those entities. And the last thing is that you might need also to declare some representatives. And those actually will be the people who will receive that notification about the fact that they're expected to answer a questionnaire within a specific deadline. And you will pick their inputs and you're going to make an assessment of what they've gave you. So entities are the vendors or partners that you want to assess. Solutions are like a more focused approach on what you want to assess specifically. And representative will be people who actually will answer those questions. So if we go back to solution, if you don't see the menu on third parties, make sure that within the feature flag, it's probably disabled. It's probably enabled and not disabled by your admin. And once it's the case, you're going to just jump straight ahead to entities and start creating yours. Here, I'm just playing with some demo data, but fundamentally, you need to give it a name, description, reference ID. If you've seen the previous videos, you probably understand now that we have this three combination pretty much everywhere. And you're gonna assign maybe a domain where this kind of entity will live in. And the cool part is that you can also manage multiple relationships that you have with those entities. One cool thing that we've seen is that people actually want also to manage beyond just the partners or contractors. Maybe you want also for specific cases where you also have some clients interacting with your IT, you want to capture that. If you have some form of authorities that you have some interaction with them, specific suppliers and so on. So you could even have those tags on top of each one of the entity. And if you need some extra information like legal identifiers, some DORA specific informations, and so on, you can go further down the road and add more information there. For the sake of this exercise, we just need like, let's call it a special vendor as a name. And let's put it as a global because maybe all of my domains could benefit from it. So we just need that to begin with. And I can just pick it here, vendor. And whenever I start creating a vendor, now I can either create straight ahead the assessment or start like by splitting and defining more accurately what are the solutions they're providing me, who are the representatives that I want to trigger. With the solutions, let's say that they have a very special SaaS. You've seen that it's automatically attached to the provider. I can give it more information. And criticality also is an optional field that could be quite useful to kind of build those clusters and organize your vendors so that you are not being overwhelmed with those third parties management all over the place. Um, One thing that could be also interesting is that you can maybe link it to specific assets so that you have a relationship directly between the solution and how it will materialize as an asset, as we've seen in the previous session, as well as extra attribute that could be useful if you are doing DORA or something like that. So for this vendor, I'm going to just create this solution and I'm going to add a representative. I'm logged as Bob. Maybe I'm going to create John at vendor.net. And notice here that you have this option of creating a user. When you will do this, it will automatically add an identity on the platform so that they can log into the solution and start filling their questionnaire.
Okay, great. I'm glad you mentioned that because that was actually one of my questions as well. You know, if the end user or the third party user would have access to the platform to fill out the questionnaire.
Exactly. So you have the choice to, and you decide whether you want them to log in and sign in and be able to do that. In some cases, you might be deploying CISO Assistant in a very confined environment since we're
Right.
supporting on premises, and it won't make any sense. You are probably just tracking this as form of directory of your contacts so that you know who to contact in which case, which is quite handy for like your posture, but more specifically in case you have incidents or some legal discussions and so on. So it could be just a handy directory where you centralize everything.
Right.
Now, if you want to delegate, like you mentioned, the filling of the questionnaire, you want to enable this option so that they have an identity that will allow them to access. Again, keep in mind that if this is the intended use case, make sure that your instance is reachable. Otherwise, it won't make sense.
Right. Might be a good use case to use something like the Pro version, but we wouldn't necessarily need to be responsible for hosting CISO Assistant. You know, you guys would take
Yeah,
care of the instance in the cloud. Yeah.
exactly. In which case, when you will do that, just make you might be wondering also about the kind of permissions that the vendors will have access to, because this could be maybe a stress point or a challenge point for people being worried about, yeah, if I'm opening my CISO Assistant instance, any vendor can access and just access my data. Everything that we've done around third parties has been designed in a way that is kind of segregated in those
Right.
virtual domains, and those virtual domains will uh, restrict and limit the access of vendors to only their questionnaires and their questionnaires only. So
Mhm.
this way, they by design they cannot access anything else because they will have this flag as third parties, and
Mhm.
they will not be able to do any harm or access any data unless you grant them specifically like read permissions on specific domains.
Great. Yeah. So they basically are siloed, just the
Exactly.
domains you grant them access to. Yeah.
Yeah, behind the curtain, it's called enclave. So basically, it's form of very restricted domain, to put it simply.
Okay. Great.
So once you create those representatives and your solutions, you can also manage your contract. This is a good segue also to mention the DORA specifically requirements, where you need also to centralize everything about your third parties, your interaction, the critical ones. Have you managed properly the contract? Who's doing what? As you give the application more data, it can help you also with the reporting if you are dealing with some regulation like DORA. If not, it could be just a good way to centralize everything in a single place and manage the life cycle and have like a continuity between your internal compliance, where in some cases you want to make sure that you covered some items in your contracts and have them directly on the platform. Um, Now that we created the entity, the representative and solution, we're ready to start the assessment. So the assessment could again review of the SaaS. I don't know if I give it the name of the special SaaS and parameter. It's going to be in which scope I'm actually running this. I could just pick this. Now, notice that even for the audit, we made it optional because in some cases you don't want to start over because you already done some ping pong with Excel sheets and you want to just to attach them, so you don't need all the time just to create an audit. If it's the case, you can just skip that and you're gonna be able to attach an evidence later on and reuse your Excel sheet. If not, and you're just doing the standard journey, you want to check this box, and automatically it will request you to pick a framework along which you're gonna manage the compliance of this vendor. Any framework that you've imported is compatible, including your custom ones, in which case you might, like Josh mentioned earlier, you don't want to overwhelm your vendors with questions that don't bring any value for you, because at the end of the day, TPRM is not about just like fill in some checklists. What you want is to get some signals or some information to make a decision. So think all the time about that, specifically about the fact TPRM is not here just for display. You want to make it actionable, and one way of making them actionable is to decide what are the risks and the concerns that you might have around vendors, and ask questions around them specifically. So this way you're saving time for them and you.
Exactly. And just to mention for the viewers, uh, in order to get these frameworks, you need to import them in the library section of CISO Assistant. And we discussed that more in depth in the previous videos. So feel free to check out those videos on the channel if you want to find out how to specifically import the different frameworks that you'll be using.
Exactly. As a matter of fact, let's just take a quick view on the libraries. And one, if you don't know where to start with this, I will advise something like the CRM from CISA is quite comprehensive, but it could be also a bit overwhelming because they went into a lot of details. Or you can go with the one that we included by Intuitum, and you can, let's pick it actually, and you'll see it's quite simple, as it's designed to be answered within an hour. So that's why it's just focusing on critical points, and you can use it as your starting point. So let's pick it, as a matter of fact, for our assessment, and pick that vendor. And on this, let's start an entity assessment. and create an audit, review of SaaS X. And here, let me pick this. And notice the point that we mentioned, Josh, earlier regarding the fact that you can either assess the full entity, the full vendor, or you want
Right.
maybe in some cases to focus on a specific solutions.
Right. So,
You,
sorry to cut you up there, but just to
yes,
kind of put that in context in real world, so the vendor could be something like Microsoft, and we could be
exactly. Yeah,
assessing like a specific tool, like just say Azure, for instance, or 365, or some other tool
absolutely.
within their
Exactly.
portfolio. Yeah.
Yeah, and in some cases there could be closed, like you mentioned. In others, could be like completely different services by almost different subsidiaries of that entity. Let's pick
Right.
something as advanced as Google, for instance. You could end up
Hmm.
in a situation where you want to assess GCP
Right.
for your public cloud usage versus something like Google Analytics. They're completely different services with different teams and so on. So in
Yeah.
some cases, you want to have that depth of your checks so that you can zoom into more details.
Right.
Otherwise, you can just skip this and continue with the rest. You could also add due date so that the app will do reminders on your behalf. And this is where you will pick the representatives that needs to be answering those questionnaires. And the conclusion is basically your outcome of the assessment when once, or to put it more accurately, once the vendor or the representative have filled the questionnaires, you want to go back and check what they've said and they answered, and you might want to give a conclusion if actually you want to block this, or it's approved, there's warning, or it's not even applicable because you're just picking informations for the sake of traceability. Again, you have more data to enrich your assessment, but it's good enough as starting point. Now, once you do this, you can send the questionnaire so that people actually will be triggered to answer the questionnaire. Let me maybe do a quick hack here to just check. Um, since I'm in local mode, I can maybe just give it a random password so that we see what the actual vendor will be looking at. In which case, I can just like sign off. And I think we called it John, right? At
Yeah.
vendors.net.
So this basically would be what the vendor is seeing here once they
Exactly.
log in. Okay.
And as we mentioned earlier, the vendor won't see everything from the platform.
Right.
As a matter of fact, you see that the UI has been filtered out so that they can
Yeah.
focus only on those audits and those evidences that they need to be following through. So let's go into details, and we can see that we have each one of the items. I can start answering them, adding maybe evidences or something like this. Or I can go with what most vendors will appreciate is the table mode. So in the table mode, few things that are worth mentioning is that you have this toggle between assessment and questionnaire mode, so that in case the framework has sub questions, they will be displayed as well. But essentially, the information that you want to pick is around the compliance. So, are you compliant or not? If you want to add some observations, and like we've seen last time, those observations are markdown compatible, so that you can just add there, as well as evidences that you can add as well. You can attach evidences as maybe a file or as a link in case maybe you have a privacy policy and the client is asking you about that. So you can just like link it. Or even further, if you already attach an evidence that can help you comply with multiple requirements, you can just pick it up and reuse it as well. With the stable mode, you can go pretty quickly. And as a reminder, for the questionnaire that I mentioned, notice that for the due diligence simple framework that I stated earlier, It's pretty straightforward, and it just helps you focus on the critical points. And again, it's designed not as a comprehensive list, but more about like quick overview of the main checkpoints that you don't want to miss. All right. Once I answer those questions, let me maybe just go very quickly on some items. You can just say compliant, partially compliant, compliant, partially compliant. Maybe I'm not compliant on this one, and so on. So I can just go very quickly like this. And notice on double mode that you also have the navigation menu, so that you can just switch very quickly between the sections.
Right.
Once I've done this, I can now go back to my initial identity, and they can track everything going on here through the overview, and they can see the progress. And if it has sub questions, it will start appearing here as well. So you have this kind of cards mode to track everything going on with your vendors.
I think this is great because sometimes if you do the manual way of just sending over, let's just say a Google sheet or Excel document or something like that, you're kind of wondering what's the status of that questionnaire, right? You're not sure where the vendor has reached in terms of filling out that. But with something like this now, you actually have kind of that real time insights
Exactly.
in terms of seeing what's going on.
And that's literally one of the reason why we created even this overview, is to be able to track what's going on. Maybe
Right.
the due date is coming soon, so you want to trigger them. By the way, guys, is there an issue? Are you still going with this questionnaires? What's going on? And you
Yeah.
can even re-trigger them if you see some warnings.
Yeah, this is great. I think this definitely is great.
And again, like we said earlier in the previous sessions, if you guys see any improvement, just reach out through different channels, and we can definitely get your feedbacks and keep improving this module. Now, what's going to be interesting is that you can even scale this approach and have multiple ones, and even manage your revisions. Maybe in some cases where you have critical vendors, you want to trigger them like each year to review their posture. Have they progressed? Have they regressed? Is there any maybe some new questions or some new concerns that coming out of the organizations, and you want them to update that? So all the above can be managed with this third party module.
I think having this unified view also is great because you could have, let's just say, vendor ABC, and you could see all these different assessments, questionnaires that you have here at this single pane of glass, instead of having to manually go through a bunch of different questionnaires. You have
Exactly.
everything here. Yeah.
Yeah. One last thing before we move to the other item is that within TPRM, there's the risk management component. So fundamentally, the workflow that you're going to have is that you define your questionnaire, you submit that to the vendors, they answer it, and you make an opinion whether you want to work with them or not based on the answers. So this is how things are supposed to be. In order to help you even further, keep in mind that you have also the capability of adding some typical threats for each one of the questions. Let me show you an example with the Google Save framework. And yeah, let's just do a quick assessment here. And this one, if I kind of say compliant, partially compliant, compliant, non-compliant on this one, notice that on the internal model of this framework, this is one of the capabilities that you can have, is that you can even decide what are the typical threats or the potential threats that are associated with a non-compliance or partial compliance. So if you want to go that route, it's definitely possible by adding in your custom framework the threat that you're fearing, so that the application can digest that information and show you automatically when they are not compliant or they're partially compliant with specific item, what are the risks. So we are sticking by doing that to the actual risk management of the TPRM and getting a first feeling about what are the risks that we need to accept, or definitely there are showstoppers so that we don't work with that specific vendor.
Okay, makes sense. So you could basically customize that based on
Absolutely.
the
Yeah,
threats in your environment. Okay.
exactly.
One question, Abda. In
Please.
terms of attachments, like just say you're ask you the vendor requirement is for them to provide a SOC 2 type 2 report.
Yeah,
Could they upload some sort of evidence like that on the platform as well?
absolutely. It's going to be the same thing as we've seen in the previous module when we talked about compliance. Keep in mind that
Mm,
under the hood, it's
right.
exactly the same thing. It's an audit on which you can attach evidences, add comments, have rich markdown. All those channels are supported to bring the information. And even further, when your vendor, like we seen like 2 minutes ago, you can reuse your own evidences so that it's also a time saver, not only for you as an organization, but also for the vendor who is answering the questions. So they can maybe pick, like you said, the SOC 2 report or the ISO 27001 certification and use it to answer maybe multiple questions.
Okay, got it.
Perfect. Which is now a good segue to move to the other module, which is the risk management. Just to keep track of what we've seen so far, we started with an overview about the asset, understanding the organizational structure, thinking about cyber resiliency, then moving to compliance to build your foundations and baseline internally, but also externally through third parties. Once you have all those basics covered, you can move to more advanced case and start conducting risk assessment. Keep in mind that you don't always need risk assessment. It will depend on the cases, and a lot of typical risks can be just covered by proper and clean compliance-driven activities, so that you don't reinvent the wheel and leave the risk assessment for specific cases. In order to do a risk assessment, we need as prerequisites to have the same organizational structures, meaning domains and perimeters. But for the first engine, which is the IC275, which is more driven toward qualitative approach, you need a risk matrix. For this, let me just take a step back and go on some kind of concepts on the risk management. There's a lot of good materials out there. If you just look for a cheat sheet around the IC275, you have great materials. But for the sake of timekeeping, we're going to just focus on two approaches: qualitative approach and quantitative one. You will find also some heated debates around risk matrices being evil and you should definitely not use them. There's some truth to this, but you don't need to be that passionate about the discussion, because what matters is what you will be doing with your risk assessment. At the end of the day, those are just tools. What matters is you need to improve your cybersecurity posture and implementing controls and do them properly and have the right communication. Now, if we're being thorough, modelization wise, definitely quantification is the best way to do that, because you're going to use accurate math, you're going to use factual information, and you can reduce a lot of psychological biases and randomness in this assessment. But at the end of the day, keep in mind that whenever you're doing risk assessment, you are managing the fact that those are unknowable variables. So don't try to get it to a point where things are pretty sharp, because it's not about that. You're still managing probabilities. You're still managing randomness. So just keep that in mind, because even if you're quantifying things, it doesn't make them more accurate. You are still dealing with inaccuracies there.
Would you say, Abda, maybe the better rule of thumb would be like less mature organizations start off with qualitative and more mature kind of lean more to the quantitative, where they have a better understanding of their environment?
You're absolutely correct, and most organizations do that. I really actually, I've never seen it where companies, when they're structuring their cybersecurity program, starting with quantitative from day one. Maybe it
Right.
exists. It's just like in my humble experience, I've never seen it. most people who are doing quantitative, they've been through the matrix approach and qualitative one. They've identified the limitations and the issues with them, and they decide to move to quantification.
Right.
So now, with that being said, there are some industries who are more advanced into that realm, like when you're coming from insurance or finance, they are already doing some form of quantification, specifically for insurance. So this is like more natural for them just to
Right.
stick to that approach. But otherwise, I've never actually seen companies starting with quantitative from day one. What you said actually make more sense for most companies where you want to start getting familiar with risk management, with the vocabulary, and understand the limitations to say, okay, now I got a good picture about what's going on with matrix-driven approach. What are the issues that I'll be facing? So I don't want to spend more time now that I understood that, and I will jump straight ahead to quantitative. The good thing is that in both cases, you have the two modules are supported in CISO Assistant, and you can go with the one that you are comfortable with and match in your organizational maturity.
Perfect.
So for the matrix, it's definitely something that you want to customize in a lot of cases, but otherwise you can just pick ones from the library and start to own it and adapt it to your context. But one thing that can help you reduce all those biases and issues with matrices is at least to define what are the levels, either on the impact, on the probability, with the specific vocabulary and with specific ownership and approval by management. So it's not going to fix all the problems of matrices, but at least it will reduce those biases and randomness during the assessment. For the quantitative, we will go with distributions, so we don't need any prerequisite per se. So let's jump straight ahead to the app. When you're here, if you don't see any modules, again, just go to the settings, feature flags, and enable or disable the modules that you are looking for. And when you come to the risk assessment part, you will need a matrix to be imported. If you don't have any, just go back to governance, library, and select one. I'm going with this 4x4 matrix for this example, and I'm gonna just pick example 1 to 3. Again, selecting parameter, and I'm good to go. On this one, notice that I already have some rendering and stuff done on my behalf, so that I don't need to bother with the paperwork, so to speak, so that I can focus more on the scenarios that I'm interested in. Now, what makes a scenario in our case is fundamentally the combination between an asset and a threat. That's what a scenario is about, fundamentally. An asset is everything that we done in the previous session. And the threat could be something picked out of the existing catalog or a specific threat that is matching the vocabulary or the threat landscape that you identified for your organization. Everything is customizable as we've seen so far. A risk origin could be also interesting in some cases where you want also to have kind of reduced scope of risk vectors so that you can have some fun analytics later on with this. I could just go with something as ransomware, and I always have this E sneak in there. It could say on my e-commerce platform, and on the threads, I believe that they have a thread that has been signed there. One thing that you probably noticed is that we don't ask people about a lot of data because in risk management, things can become cumbersome if we ask everything at once. But we rather focus on just the critical informations so that you can enrich them later on. And to be honest, most of us do this anyway, where you want to start by picking just some high-level information and refine them as you go down the risk assessment approach. To get to that point, let's just, now that we created this one, I can edit it. In this case, I can go into more details. Noticing that I still have my assets and threats and can assign it to someone. I can manage the life cycle. I can maybe create a chain of scenarios. But fundamentally, I need to describe what this scenario is about. Again, Markdown is supported. And based on this description, I will need to establish a profile of this risk. The first one will be the current risk level. Essentially, it will depend on the existing controls. If I have X, Y, and Z that are already implemented, I can make an assessment about, yeah, given my current level, let's make something more realistic. We're talking about ransomware. Let's say that maybe I've done something around backup policies, right? This is good. I've done maybe something around some EDR. That is good also. But given what I've noticed in my organization or my industry, this is going to be my profile. Is that probability is likely, and the impact maybe is still important, and the risk is medium. And you might be wondering about where are those values are being picked out of. They're extracted automatically from the risk matrix that we've seen a moment ago. So if you want more specific vocabulary, you can just customize it when you're customizing your matrix. Now, this will constitute our current risk postures or current risk level. If this risk level is not acceptable, I want to bring it to a lower level by implementing extra controls, right? So let's say that for the sake of efficiency, I'm gonna maybe implement immutable backups, but I also want people actually to get ready by doing some simulation exercises. I know that in most cases, I will be only capable of reducing probability, but when you're dealing with the resiliency and you are doing maybe immutable backups, you can even reduce the impact where it could be maybe significant but not important. And the probability, if I've done all those checks and all those readiness, I can even reduce it a bit more. You have other attributes that can help you enrich the information by mentioning the qualification. Is it like about availability? Does it involve people? Is there some financial impact possible? And source of knowledge is more about your level of confidence regarding this assessment. Once we do this, notice that again, all the paperwork and the display will be organized on your behalf so that you're more focused and more laser focus on the modeling and the content of the risk rather than managing the rendering and everything else. And the risk will take its position into the right cell of that matrix. Once we've done this, what do we need to do afterwards? Either we can start preparing some communication materials with management and so on, for which we have multiple exports, but the actual value will be around the action plan. And the action plan is essentially all the controls that we identified that will help us to reduce that risk. If we're getting there, each time I'm picking a control, it will be linked to that risk, and it will appear in my review of my action plan, either as existing controls or as controls to do later on. I can also benefit from the same capability that we mentioned earlier by sync to action. Sync to action, what it will do essentially is that if it detects that your extra controls have been implemented, it will propagate those controls back to the existing controls, but also it will bring your residual level to the current level so that you know that you reach that specific level. You can go a bit further by defining a risk tolerance, in which case you can say, all right, so any risk that is within medium or lower is fine for me. So I can see it like as tolerable. So probably you don't need to go beyond that. Or if you change that and mention maybe low this time, it will tell you, oh, this risk is not it's not good. So you can even have filters and advanced parsing of those data so that the application starts working for you.
So by specifying your tolerance level, it gives you the ability to focus on the risk that you actually need to, get down. Yeah.
Exactly. So the ones that are beyond that tolerance are the ones that you need to be prioritizing and focusing on regarding implementation. Once you finish
Right.
them, you move to the other ones. And by the way, I've seen it also in some cases where people in their risk assessment, they already covered everything, but they want to display of what they've done so far. So they will pick up all the existing actions, and they want also to showcase that multiple scenarios are within the risk tolerance, and they will not do anything more. So even the residual level, in some cases, you don't need it if you've done already the work.
Okay.
Last but not least, you can also duplicate and create maybe multiple revisions so that it can say, yeah, this is like 2025 risk assessment. I will just lock it and create a clone so that I will refresh it, but in a different revision, so that I'm not affecting or changing or tuning anything on the previous one, so that I can compare them later on.
Okay. And it allows you just to kind of pick up from where you left off instead of having to manually build that
Exactly. You don't need to
program.
start
Yeah.
over. You just clone
Yeah.
everything. Yeah, exactly.
Great.
Now, with that being said, if we move to the CRQ on the risk quantification, you can manage. Let me do like quick demo here. Things with more distributions, and for the sake of simplicity, we know that people actually are still kind of impressed by the math behind the quantifications, even if it's like quite simple. So for the sake of clarity and just to bootstrap this, we embedded even some distribution models. So you don't need even to fine tune all the math. You can just focus on giving the business inputs and let the application manage it on your behalf. So let me display the critical informations. Again, you will have a container, which is the study. And within the study, you will pick scenarios. Again, let's pick ransomware. And you can mention the same combination, the assets and threats that we've seen earlier, right? And for this scenario, the difference in quantification, which is pretty cool and powerful, is that you can even model multiple hypotheses. I can say, right now, this is my current level. What if I implement this control? What if I've done those two controls? What if I stop the solution? All those hypotheses are quite easily manageable in quantification, which is an interesting strength to consider whenever you're dealing with risk management. And when you get started, you need to start by filling the baseline or the current profile. So the first thing that you want to mention is the same as we've seen earlier, is the treatment plan. What is currently your existing controls? So if I'm doing the same thing as earlier, I can just say, yeah, I have a backup policy as starting point. And given those parameters, the probability of this, so instead of mentioning low, likely, unlikely as probability, here we're going to talk about probabilities. And you're going to talk about the lower bounds and upper bounds on a loss expectancy. So this is like the fundamental aspect, is that when you're dealing with impact, you will always bring it to money, and you're going to always bring it to the expected loss. So here I can just start with something as basic as, in the best case scenario, I might lose maybe 2,000, and in worst case scenario, maybe I could lose up to 100K. Once I've done this simulation, this inputs, I can create maybe a simulation so that it will build me. This is the interesting part, is that you have this interactive curve about how will this behave. And behind the curtain, it triggers something that's called Monte Carlo simulations. There's a lot of good materials out there if you want to go to details, but you don't need to master all those mathematical concepts. What matters is that based on those inputs, it will tell you, oh, your starting point is like those 40% about, and you can go to the tail point about the fact that you could lose up to 200 Ks with like 1% or something like this, and so on and so on. What's going to be interesting is that for each one of the scenarios, you want to compare multiple hypotheses. This is the first one, but you can create even multiple options. Is that what if one, I can just create this, and I can even create, let me even show that I can create multiple ones at the same time. What if two? I'm not going to select this one. So this way I can even compare multiple options. And for each one of the options, I can just go again and enrich the hypothesis. This one will depend on the treatment plan. If I just add maybe more policies or maybe more simulations, I can maybe act on the probability. This is good. And if I go a bit further, where is it? This one, if I, on my treatment plan, I do both maybe the simulation and I'm going to pick the backups. I know that based on this information, maybe I can reduce it up to this, and even the loss can be reduced because I can segregate better and I can reduce the impacts on all those items. Whenever you do this, you can always go back to the study and refresh all the simulations at once. Once it's refreshed, you can see even the portfolio overview and how it's going to reduce your risk. And the last interesting part is that you can even model your ROI, return of investment, risk-wise for each one of the controls. If you go that route, you can jump here. We can maybe look at the controls that we implemented. Yeah, let's do this here. Yeah, view more. What are the added controls? I can go here, I can edit it, and can give the information some costing. And just go with this, just for the sake of the example. So with this, if I go back to the system, I can see return of investment being calculated on my behalf. So those are some powerful features that you can explore when you do quantifications. But again, if you are just getting started, you will be pleased to know that you can just start with your risk qualifications. Even if it's not accurate, at least it's a good starting point to find what are the weaknesses, and for which we added this cool feature recently that can help you even do a conversion and move from the matrices to distribution by providing the application some anchoring points. So we just give it some anchoring points, as a matter of fact. Maybe give it something non-linear. And here, maybe I can even add thresholds. Let's say that my threshold in this case is maybe, like, remember when you mentioned the risk tolerance earlier for the matrices, where you choose whether it's low, medium, or whatever. Here, it's more accurate because you're literally going to say, I can afford to lose up to X amount.
Right.
When I run this, notice that it generated everything on my behalf. It's created those hypotheses and even run all the simulations to get you started. And you know the probability of going beyond that threshold is around maybe 20% currently. But once I implemented everything, I can maybe reduce it. Yeah, here it's around 20%. I can lose up to how much? Yeah, around 60 Ks, and here I'm around maybe, yeah. See, I can reduce the probabilities between the two.
I think this is actually a really good and kind of unified approach that CISO Assistant is doing, because it gives you the ability, if you're new to risk management, to just start off with the qualitative approach that you showed at the beginning, and then if you're more mature, you could go to the quantitative, and you provide that bridge as well too, right? Where
Yeah,
you, if you just have the qualitative and you wanted an easy way to switch over to quantitative, you have that bridge where you could actually convert from qualitative to quantitative without necessarily needing to have the expertise,
yeah.
to figure out all of those different
Exactly.
formulas and stuff.
So it's a
Yeah.
good smooth transition. So if you're allergic to math, you don't need to worry about that, and you can just
Right.
let the application walk you through that part. And the end of this, like we've seen it everywhere, you have also some advanced analytics, even some exact summary, where it tells you about your current profile of exceeding the threshold. It's like about 25%. But if you've done everything that you expect to do, you can reduce it up to 5%. And those information that are more accurate are more powerful and more impactful when you're talking to
Yeah.
management, where you're bringing them
Exactly.
values rather than just saying low, medium, high. That's why the whole industry is shifting progressively toward quantification. But again, it will take some time to get there, and it needs some prerequisite and some maturity, like you mentioned earlier.
I'm assuming we can, but how do we export something like this? Like, say, a quantitative report, we want to share this with executive management. How would we go
Right.
about doing that?
So you have multiple PDF export, and this one is PDF export friendly as well. I believe that we have added some key metrics as well with the whole action plan, and you can even have kind of projection and seeing that the app will tell you over time how your risk profile will advance. So those are animation; those cannot be exported, but you have multiple export options that are supported as well. Plus, what matters is at the end of the day, remember, is the action plan. All those risk assessment are just tools, and people
Yeah,
should not be like too passionate about risk assessment. What matters is what you do with them,
the
and
end goal. Yeah.
yeah, what you will do with them is the action plan. So each time you will pick some actions and assign them as extra controls, they will feed this overview. Here we didn't select any, but when you do that, they will end up here. And this is what you need to track to start reducing your risks. Um, Now that we covered those two families of approaches, again, qualitative is a good starting point, but you'll reach the limits uh, at some point. If you are efficient with them and you are able to drive decisions, smart ones, accurate ones, feel free to stick to qualitative. Don't change anything if it's doing what they're to do. But if you want something more accurate and more powerful and more maybe less random, you want to move to quantitative. And by the way, we have also more in-depth sessions and videos if you are interested into that. One last thing regarding risk management is that if you want to go through maybe a more sophisticated approach, we also support the TPRM. So this is like more known in Western Europe and could be a good framework, so to speak, to think about all the concerns when you're doing risk management. So if you're lacking some inspirations and you're not familiar with how to split things, even if it takes slightly more time, it's a good mental model to go over all the concepts around framing, around fair events, your baseline foundations, your third parties, and so on. So it can help you structure your approach. And there are some materials by the French authorities to get started with this. Again, it's optional, but if it's something that you're looking for, feel free to get the textbook from the ANSI or reach out on the Discord to get more assistance. With this, we covered another part of the CISO Assistant platform. Now, with everything that we've seen, you have all the basics to get started. You know how to manage the libraries. We've seen the compliance internally with audits. We've seen it externally with third parties, and we've seen how to manage and conduct your risk assessment, either with qualitative approach or quantitative ones. The next steps will depend on the area that you're more interested in. It could be around structuring your policies, organizing your ISO program, manage your pen tests and exceptions, or go in with the privacy engine, managing metrics and dashboards and so on. For all the other modules, documentation is a good starting point. And as usual, if you're stuck on something, you have multiple channels to reach out.
Yeah, and as Abda mentioned, we have a bunch of videos that we previously did. I have an actual playlist on the YouTube channel containing all those videos. So feel free to check out that playlist where you could get it. It shows you how to get started from day one. Just spinning up CISO Assistant. The community edition, which Abda has been demoing on these videos, is basically the community edition, which you could get started for free today. So you could feel free to check out that video as well as the other series of videos where we took you through asset management, BIA, internal audits, etc. Feel free to check out that as well. I must say, Abda, this probably is one of my most favorite videos that we did today. Reason being, I haven't really used the third party compliance management module as yet, so I was very interested to see what you can do there. It definitely is a seamless experience for what I'm seeing there, as opposed to the old manual way of doing things, managing third party vendors, as well as to some of the things in terms of converting from qualitative, because I've primarily used qualitative risk management in CISO Assistant, but it's nice to see that bridge where you could, it kind of gives you that hand to convert from something like qualitative to quantitative without really a heavy lift on your end. CISO Assistant makes it more seamless. So definitely one of my more favorite videos, I would say. But all the videos are great, but just it was a more learning experience for me, particularly on this video.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you for having me on the channel. Looking forward to the next one, depending on the topics that the community will ask us to do, and we'll cover that definitely.
Definitely. And guys, please comment down below. CISO Assistant, you can do so much for this platform, but we want to make content that's important to you. So as Abdul said, there are modules with help you manage like your pen tests, all those different things. So if there's something that you would like us to cover in particular, just comment down below and we'll try our best to make that video happen for you. Also, maybe consider subscribing to my YouTube channel, because I share this kind of content on a regular basis. So if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting on the notification bell so you'll be notified once a new video is released. Again, I want to thank you, Abda, for taking the time off of your busy schedule to join us on this series of CISO Assistant videos. And I look forward, to probably having you on more videos once we get feedback from the community. I'll also leave links to CISO Assistant down in the video description, all the channels, as well as joining the Discord if people want to, get more involved there as well.
Yeah. All right. Thanks again. Have a good one, and until next time.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.